Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at Air Manual, and I'm joined by my co-founder and co-host, Paddy Mann. Paddy, hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. So yesterday we explored some practical tips on how a business leader or owner can free up a lot of their time. And the first step was to prioritize the areas that they need to delegate. So today I want to open up that a little further and give those people listening some examples of the types of tasks that they could be delegating. So to do this, we're going to look at each area of our own business and talk about what worked when we were looking to delegate, but also what didn't. We're going to be covering sales, engineering, finance, data security and IT, HR, marketing, all the key functions in the business. And so at the end, we'll summarize a few rules that you can apply when looking for those tasks that you need to be delegating. So if it's okay with you, Paddy, I'll perhaps start with sales.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, cool. So this is, I think this is a good place to start because it's often one of the first areas that you really need to delegate in your business. Because if things are going well, if you're getting some sales into your business, which is where you should be generally starting off with, is proving that there's a market for your business and that people are willing to pay money for it. That's where you often start is recruiting and hiring into that area, even if it's admin tasks in that area. And so typically what we've seen work really well is when you get very clear about what's the sales process that you're using that works. How are you attracting your leads? How are you then qualifying them? How are you then following up with them to perhaps arrange that first sales conversation? Then on that sales conversation or discovery call, what are the questions that you're asking, and how you're using the answers to those to then relate it to how you might be able to solve your product or service can solve their biggest problems, and present them with an offer and a price and all that kind of stuff that's going to be amenable to them. And so I think the mistake that certainly I've made in the past while trying to do this area, and I know many other business owners that have done the same, is putting too much weight on hiring a really experienced salesperson and not giving them this is how we sell and this is what's worked for us. And so certainly, we did that back when we hired our first salesperson, and it cost us a lot of money as a result, and we had to make redundancies, which was really, really painful. Whereas now, like across my businesses, when we're hiring into sales roles, we're typically looking for values fit and enthusiasm and clarity of communication. And if they've got those things, whether or not they've had sales experience and so on becomes less important for us, because we give them the process, we give them the knowledge, the understanding, the steps that you go through, the questions to ask, so that they can support someone through that process. Now, that's not to say you can't then build on that with sales skills, or that when you recruit into that area that you don't want someone with experience, but it's really powerful when you do that. And so in terms of the task that you're delegating, you've obviously got that discovery call, that sales call, but then all the follow-up. And in general, I would argue that it should include sending invoices as well. I think that I've seen many businesses where they kind of anything financy, like sending an invoice or even chasing payments, they pass over to finance. But then I see that there's a disconnect where for the salesperson, it's almost like, oh yeah, they said yeah, they'd go ahead, therefore my job is done. And actually, there's 100 reasons why someone might not then go ahead and pay the invoice and all those sorts of things. So I think you don't want those drop balls. That all needs to be part of it in that process. So those are some of the key tasks that I'd see that need to be delegated. Anything else I've missed there, Paddy? Otherwise, perhaps you could take on engineering.
Well, I'll add one thing to the sales, because I often see new customers coming in and they express this concern about delegating sales, especially when it's a business leader or owner who's doing it all. And they're worried that you can't delegate or train a junior resource to have a good sales conversation, that they're not going to be able to get the same results as the business owner. And I guess the thing I'll share is that just isn't true. It will require you to systemize how that call works in a way which you're not currently, and work out what the steps are that you're taking in that call that work for you. And there are loads of great books that also take a very kind of clear format about how you quickly introduce your own business and your offering, and then turn it around to ask questions so you get a load of context around their business before going through the other steps on the call, including, the demo or the offer or whatever. But it really is possible to systemize that. It's not about making it robotic. Most of that sales conversation will normally be questions and responding to what the person you're selling to is telling you and about helping them their challenges. So it's not about being robotic, but there is and can be and should be a structure. And actually, we found both in our own business and with the people that we're helping that putting that in place, not only has it allowed them to delegate, but it's also allowed them to get better results in their sales calls, because they have to look at what the best practices are for how to structure it, because there are ways to do that.
Yeah, and generally are more consistent with their follow-up as well. I love having conversations with customers and exploring how we can solve their needs and so on. But as a bit of a classic entrepreneur, I'm not great at making sure that I'm always rigorous in the follow-up and follow things and do things by the book. Yet the team are, and as a result, in many cases they get better results as me. And I think that's a good point. I really like your point as well around it's not about making them robotic. I think a lot of people worry about creating the process because they think, oh, this is a sales script that you get in call centers and it just feels so false. And actually, the best salespeople have a script, but it's not about creating something that you say and commit to slavishly, regardless of what's going on. That's what feels robotic and fake. It's about having, as you say, having a structure and a process that you go through. And actually, that's great for the customer because they want to be guided. Like I had a conversation with a great salesperson yesterday and he literally starts off with, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to talk about where you're at now, where you're looking to get to. And, I suddenly feel like, I can relax on the customer side of that because I'm going to be taken through this journey. Whereas when you get someone who just turns up and it's like, hey, yeah, how you doing? What are you up to? Like, have you had a good holiday? Da, da, da. Like, I don't know where this is going. And as a result, as the customer side, I feel like I've got to take charge of the conversation. And that's the worst thing that can happen to you for the sales side. So, I completely agree. Cool. Perhaps let's jump over to engineering.
Yeah, let's do it. So in our business, we're talking software engineering and all the parts of the business that supports that. So we've got the development teams, we've got DevOps, which is to do with the servers, we've got tech support, helping our customers when challenges appear. Now, there's a lot of opportunity for delegation, but I think and the obvious ones are perhaps in kind of tech support, where there's a kind of really routine kind of series of steps that you need to take to deal with a specific customer problem. Now, the ones that delivered the most value weren't around tech support, it was around the actual software engineering and the development. And that was because that's where the team was spending most of their hours and time, and where the most issues would come up, and where I needed to spend most of my time with supporting them. And it's interesting because a lot of people kind of struggle with it. It's like, how would you systemize? How would you start delegating software engineering? Because the tasks aren't the same. You're working on new features every time. It's a whole new design, a whole new ball game, a whole new set of technical challenges. But what you need to separate is the process from the project. So the project might be, today we're going to do a marketing website, and that's what we're going to develop. Or we've got a project which is around a new API or some hardware. But there's going to be a series of steps which you need to take each time, regardless of the project. And that's what you can systemize and build in those processes. So what we did is we went through the whole SDLC, the software development lifecycle, and did the lot. So it starts with how to prepare for and design and hand over a process. We include how to define acceptance criteria at the start of before you've started development, which is an amazing way to hand over and then gets everyone in sync between the people designing it, the product owner, and the development team.
And to be clear on that, like, acceptance criteria is the definition of what will it take before we accept that this is done, right? It's kind of the agreeing those requirements up front.
It is, and actually, that's something we've rolled out across other areas of the business. In software development, we then turn those into automated tests. That's another story. Um, then there's a process for how to develop and the steps that you're going to need to go through. Then we've got a peer review process where you ask a colleague to review your solution, and it's not just looking at the code, it's looking at the architecture, it's looking about whether you've delivered on those acceptance criteria, it's about testing in various different ways, checking the security, all those things which often get forgotten, and if you miss them, they will either take a load of my time when I'm reviewing, or they're going to take a hell of a lot of time from the whole team because they pop up after you've released it, and then you've got an issue to deal with. So we put all those steps into the peer review. We actually, if I go back a step, we make the person who's doing it do a self-review of their own solution before it goes to a peer review. And we found that saved a huge amount of time, both at the peer review stage, but of the kind of the back and forth, the ping pong between the two parties. Then there's a process for how to do UAT, so user acceptance testing, where we tested it actually, the product owner is happy that it delivers what we set out to achieve. And another process for release. Beyond that, there's a load of processes for how to set up servers, how to do tech support, and so on. But it was that SDLC that gave us the biggest benefits at the start, and it looked like the hardest area to systemize, but boy, did it pay off.
Yeah, and I love that. And I want to throw in a couple of things, and one is a point, and then the second's a question for you, Paddy. So the first is that when you describe that, it reminds me of other businesses where it's not software development, but the challenges are very similar. So the group that comes to mind are like marketing agencies. So maybe they're doing copywriting, maybe they're a branding agency, or they're a website development company, or whatever it is. And often when I speak to those business owners, they say, oh, well, every project's very different, and and we're very creative people, and some are very technical, and so And so you have all that. So, I'm not sure whether having checklists and processes would help. But of course, exactly as you've described, like defining those requirements, those acceptance criteria up front, and having all of that, that's absolutely critical to making sure that you don't end up derailing and going off on different areas. Which brings me to the question, which is, I think some people might listen to what you've described with the software development lifecycle, and even if they're then thinking how they apply it to a non-engineering case, and they might feel like, oh, well, that sounds like writing a lot of red tape. There's a lot of additional steps there. Can't we just get on and develop? So what would you say, why, what's been the impact of having that in place versus the alternative?
Yeah, it's funny that it sounds like red tape. When it's done well, the rules that you put in place free you up to be creative. It actually removes that burden because it gives you an agreed philosophy, an agreed set of standards that the team are saying, as long as you do this, as long as you go through these steps and meet these standards, then you're golden. And once you've agreed those kind of standards across the team, you can then work around those and use your creativity at each step of the process. And I love it. It gives me so much more freedom when I know that the stuff I'm going to do and invest hours of my time designing at night or whatever, that the process will support me, so that when it comes across to Alexis, he's going to be able to review it and give feedback at the right level. So sometimes he needs to give feedback about the goal. What am I even doing? Sometimes he needs to give feedback about where I'm looking for inspiration. Sometimes it's going to be about the high-level stuff or the low-level stuff. Before we put these processes in place, then I would basically do a ton of work, hand it over, and Alexis would be like, okay, there's some fundamental issues here. I don't want to offend Paddy. I can see that he's invested a lot of time in here.
Yeah,
he's clearly got a cold sweat going on. What do I say? Yeah. And it's actually, it works the opposite way. It gives you structure so that you can then shine within each of those stages.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And of course, particularly when you're in creative endeavors like that, where there is so much room for tangents and so on, and it frankly, it hurts your feelings, right? When you worked literally for nights, days, whatever, to produce something, and then you identify like, oh no, this is complete tangent, this is all wasted work. that feels horrible. Whereas when you've gone through a process, like your risk of doing that is much lower. So I love that. Cool, really really good. Let's move on to another area then. So an area that I've always loved systemizing is finance, because it's an area that a lot of business owners hate. Frankly, they would prefer to abdicate from it completely, just pass it over to someone else. And yet, I think one of the big traits that I see in successful business owners and those that are growing faster and so on is that they know the numbers. They're all over the finances. They understand cash flow. They understand their profit and loss statement. They understand their balance sheet, and they understand how all those come together to tell the story of the business. And so it's an area that, as a business owner, you mustn't abdicate from. However, you can certainly delegate the day-to-day, and you can delegate those steps. And in fact, by doing so, it can make the picture of finance much easier to read. For example, some of the processes that I delegated first, because for a long time I was basically finance, right? Like, Paddy, you managed, you did well to be a co-founder with me, right? Because you managed to completely avoid most of it. And so, firstly, things like sending invoices and so on, and moved that over to sales. But on the finance side, the daily bank reconciliations was something like where, we'd have a customer who pays into our bank account, and my salespeople were saying, well, have we had the money? The customer now says that they've paid and so on. And so I would then have to go and check on the bank account and go, oh, yeah, sorry, yeah, they have paid. And then they'd say, oh, but it doesn't show as paid in our accounting system. So I go, I know I haven't done the reconciliations yet, and so on. And it's those kind of things. And when I then delegated and handed that over, it means that you've probably got it's probably only 10 to 15 minutes every day that needed doing. But that time over a long period and the derails that it was causing for me were huge. And so I handed over things like bank reconciliations, paying our suppliers and employees and contractors and so on a fortnightly basis, doing our payroll, doing our VAT returns, all those sorts of things. I documented them all as I did them. And then I was able to bring in a finance administrator who with zero finance expertise. They were a maths grad. It was one of the most amazing hires I've ever made, because they came in with just such raw talent, and were able, in a really short period of time, like 2 days, they were able to free up about a day of my time a week, and then the following another couple of weeks, and I was freeing up 2.5 days from all the financy tasks that I was doing. But even better than that, they've then been able to take on things like cash flow forecasting and forecasting, like doing revenue forecasting, diving in and helping with marketing analytics. And because we just agree, what's the aim, what are we trying to do, and then we turn it into a series of steps that they can support. And so it's not just about the freeing up the time there, and it's not even just about the getting your cash in quickly and so on. It's about the clarity on your numbers and being able to steer your business in the right direction and know what's working, where you need to reduce costs and so on, so much faster, because you're not having to wait for an accountant at the end, like 6 months after your end of your financial year, to find out that actually you've been loss making and you need to make some changes. Like that's been absolutely crucial for us.
Yeah, finance is a really interesting one. It's, as you say, a lot of business owners don't want to spend their time there, let alone thinking about documenting it, but document it for yourself and you will love yourself next time around. I have a process which I have to do. I'm living in Sweden. I have to fill in Swedish PAYE, pay as you earn forms and annual forms. And I am so grateful that I've documented exactly what I need to do. I've got this step which says, there's a big scary button that appears now. Don't worry. It's nothing to worry about. Just click OK or whatever OK is in Swedish.
Because it's all in Swedish, right?
Yeah. I don't know, but every time I see it, I go, and then, take a sip of tea, carry on. But yeah, it's not one that people like doing, but finance is naturally, it's an easy one. You don't have to really think about it in the same way. There's less creative work. The steps in the finance tasks are perfectly aligned with writing an SOP, which brings us nicely onto data security and IT, which is an area I'm doing. And I'd say it's the same. So in data security, we need to do a lot of training up teams. So we create an SOP for them to go through training, so they're aware of what our data security standards are. And then there's a lot of SOPs. So we have to check over vulnerabilities in our software. We have to check our backups. Here's a classic one. Check your backups work. When did you last do that? Well, I can say that we're doing it routinely because it's an SOP which we've set up to be something which is run. I'll have to check the time. I think it's once every few months, and so we have great confidence that this is happening. And both in data security and IT, almost every part of it lends itself to just being a checklist which can be handed down, and you start with the ones that are either causing the most pain immediately or pose the biggest risk to your business, and work through and deal with it. One area that comes up when we're doing data security is how to deal with incidents when everything falls over. And though it doesn't come up when it doesn't come up often, but when it does come up, it is one of my favorite processes in the entire business. All right, let's look at
it's one of the worst things to happen, right? It's a data, like it's some kind of incident. Yeah.
Should we go on to HR?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think HR brings together a few things that we've covered already. Like HR has got some elements of finance, things that need to be done on a regular basis. And a bit like data security and IT, you've got some tasks that actually the space, the amount of time in between when you need to run it makes it so long that it's very easy to forget. And so that's another great thing to have delegated as a business leader is stuff like that is easy to forget but really painful if you do. Like for example, in our case, I remember a mistake that I made where I wasn't reminding any people to take holiday, and as a result, we got to the end of the holiday year, and suddenly everyone wants to use up their allowance, which, as we provide everyone with 40 days holiday, ends up being a lot. And I think I calculated the cost of that mistake at over £25,000. So having someone regularly, and in fact it used to be monthly. I saw that our HR team recently decided that they're going to change it to fortnightly. They put out a regular reminder of here's what you've currently used, here's your allocation, and they nudge people that haven't taken it. And I think having those processes so that you're always doing that. So I think there's one side of it, which is those recurring, a bit like finance and data security IT. But there's another whole part of HR around recruitment and onboarding, which is actually more like kind of sales. It's essentially how are you taking leads, except in HR you'd call them candidates, and how are you taking them through a process in which you're learning about them and qualifying whether they'd be a good fit for you, but also they're trying to decide whether you'd be a good fit for them. So there's an element of that kind of two-way sales process. And so in a similar way to we talked about with sales, you need those kind of scripts for how to do interviews and how you have those conversations and the comms that needs to go at each stage of a recruitment process. And then when you get to onboarding, when you've made someone an offer and they've accepted, how do you then make sure that they're going to actually turn up on day one? You'd be surprised at how many business owners I speak to where they go, oh yeah, I thought I had a really good hire and they didn't show up. That's not a good sign, is it? And a lot of that is down to, so what nurturing did you do? How did you make sure that they were supported on the line? And of course the answer is we didn't. They accepted the offer, we agreed a date, we assumed that they'd turn up. Now, of course, that feels crazy for us, right? Because we've got onboarding process that include sending them a gift before they even join, and sharing our journey and our vision and values, and getting them to sign our NDA, and doing all these sorts of things, all before they even join on their first day. And then we have the onboarding process that they go through, so that they feel supported, empowered, and like they've got that group around them that really want them to succeed. But also not stopping there, making sure that person is then able to start adding value in the role. So that's it, as an area, HR, I think, is often overlooked by business owners and kind of just seen as, oh yeah, HR issues, when someone's complaining or whatever. And actually, HR is such a powerful lever, a little bit like finance can be, in that ultimately your success as a business comes down to how effectively or how high performing your teams are. And so HR is all about how you do that. And so having those processes to make sure that you're consistent with people, because that's another thing, is fair treatment, like making sure that you're equitable and so on across. It's really, really important to have those processes. So delegating that, A, frees up a load of time, but B, means you can play at a much higher level than you'd otherwise be able to do if you kind of felt like, oh, I'm responsible for HR and therefore I have to do the bare minimum. Any other thoughts on that? Otherwise, let's go to marketing.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a few more episodes, particularly on HR, because it's a whole world. It's not just freeing up your time when you delegate it for the first time. It's freeing up your time from having to recruit new people when you have failed them because you haven't supported them during the onboarding, during their life cycle as an employee. Marketing's an interesting one. I'm just going to touch really briefly on it because there's loads of stuff you can delegate. And so some of the stuff at the moment, we're running the new podcast. So we're writing out the processes for how to create the podcast, how to prepare for it, how to follow up after it, how to repurpose our content and get it out onto different channels. The point I want to raise about marketing is that I've been in leading marketing and engineering. I know engineering really, really well. I don't know marketing as well, and I'm learning it sometimes as I go along. That means that while engineering is my strength, that is the area that I can delegate effectively and manage it. So even though I am a pretty good developer and can do, frankly, everything in engineering, I've done it at some point, that's got to be the area that I delegate to someone else, because marketing, which isn't my strength, is an area where we need leadership focusing on making sure it works. And that essentially means I've got to learn it. And until I've learned it and understood what's working and what steps should be involved in each task, it's really, really difficult to delegate. And I'll put my hands up. Tried it a few times, and it keeps kicking me in the ass because when I haven't got clear myself on what the expectations are or how I'm expecting how to do it, I struggle to manage. I struggle to acknowledge. Sometimes they've done some really clever stuff, but it's unclear to me exactly which bits are working and which aren't. And so you can delegate so much in marketing. You can create the processes for how to do creative content. You can set your brand guidelines so everyone knows what's expected. You can create all these processes for creating content and repurposing. But for me personally, when I've been doing it, the important thing has been to make sure I understand what good looks like and how I would approach it before trying to do it, because otherwise I can't manage it.
Yeah, no, I love that. It makes me think of the, funnily enough, there are parallels with finance, which you might be surprised by, because I think that a lot of business owners fall into either the camp where they love marketing, and actually they've kind of, if anything, growing almost too quickly, that they're at risk of growing broke because they just are pump managing they're working the Facebook machine and they're pumping money in and so on. And so for them, they need to be handing that over so they can free up time to go and sort out things like the finances and the operations and so on, because that's letting the business down, right? They're bringing in leads, but they're not converting, or they're bringing in leads and getting sales, but those are resulting in refunds, or they're not getting the cash in, or they're not doing it profitably. And so I think there's kind of a group of business leaders around that side. And then there's a group where I think we would both fall more into, which is that actually we're much more comfortable with the operations, the delivery, the sales, and making sure we're delivering for clients, making sure it's turning into cash, managing the finances, and the marketing is more of a weakness. And I think for that group, the risk or the tendency is to think, I just wish I could just outsource this to an agency. Why can't I just give all of this to someone else? And I'm yet to meet a business owner who said, oh yeah, I've got this amazing agency, I just hand it over to them and they got me all the results. Like we've been doing this a long time. I've been working with businesses 17 years. We've been running our own for 12. I'm yet to, and I've met hundreds, possibly over thousands of business owners, and yet I'm yet to meet someone in that situation. And it's because you have, there's so much that's in your head that you have to provide that agency or that marketing manager or whoever you hire or whatever, in terms of the story, in terms of the vision and who the ideal customer is. Like, you're knitting together so much of your understanding of the business that needs to come together. So it might be that the agency can then make sure it shows up in a really stylish way on Facebook, or that it turns into a good landing page or whatever. But ultimately, you've got to be all over it. And so I think it's a great area to delegate, but you've got to avoid that. Same as finance, you've got to avoid the abdication, because that is the temptation, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And frankly, you see it everywhere. It's you got to look at what your strengths are as a business leader. Actually, go, I'm strong at this enough that I can manage and then lead that area. I have to stop doing that, and I have to work out how to do the other areas. Which brings us brilliantly, I think, just to start kind of summarize what are the general things that you should be looking at, regardless of where you are, what level you are in the business. What kind of tasks should you be considering delegating?
Yeah, and so I think generally we'd say recurring tasks are great. The ones that are coming up frequently. Then once you've done some of those, you can do the ones that come up less frequently as you go over time. Generally, 15 minutes spent documenting some of those steps for like filing the annual returns, like we talked about before. You then really appreciate yourself in the past when you then come around to do it. Right, you're doing your year-end self-assessment or whatever, and you go, "Oh, cool! I've got a checklist that I created for myself back then," so you're not having to relearn it all over again. So even creating a checklist for yourself, never mind then delegating it. I think also you need to be delegating tasks that you'd be confident doing yourself and are therefore able to manage someone else doing. Like once you've worked out how to sell, or once you've worked out how to make sure that you're recruiting the right people into the organization, that's a great time to then hand it over, because then you can manage by results. You know what you're expecting to come out of the machine, and therefore if that's not happening, you can go back and look at how that needs to be improved. And that does mean that in some cases you'll be handing over things that are your strengths, at least temporarily, or at least, like if sales is your strength, it might be that you're passing more sales around you so that you're at least able to step out of that, even if you then do spend a lot of time in there. We talked about, Paddy, with you being an excellent engineer, but it's one of the areas that we delegate so that you can be freed up to do design and marketing and so on. Another area that I think is great to delegate is quality reviews. It's an easy one to assume that you need to do, but actually it's not the case. Typically, you can come up with a set of criteria that you're looking at, as Paddy talked about earlier, to make sure that it's easy to just identify whether things are being done correctly. And then management tasks as well, like going up a level. You don't just need to delegate those kind of activity and coalface stuff. Populating dashboards, facilitating meetings, even getting to the point where it's like managing people, doing one-to-ones, doing performance reviews. All of those things can be made simpler, turned into checklists, and handed over and delegated to other people so that they can run it. One of my favorite things is the fact that our managers in the team are described as the best managers that their direct reports have ever had. And I love that, because it means that we didn't hire them because they were great managers. Of course, they're great people. And they're a good fit with our values. But they're following a process that means they're able to do a really good job. In terms of the bad tasks to delegate, I think one-off tasks where there's a lot of effort to do the handover, therefore managing it exceeds the time that you're saving. But also tasks that you're not confident doing yourself. The areas that we talked about before where you're abdicating, things where you're not sure what the outcome should look like or what the steps would look like, and so you just throw it over to someone else and hope that they will come up and give you the result that you magically didn't even know you wanted. That's a painful experience and takes a lot of time and money. Any other tips, Paddy?
Probably just two things I'd add to that. So firstly, don't hold back because you think you've hired people to do a specific task and it's not the task that you need to delegate. We've actually got loads of examples where firstly, we did hold back, and you, for example, held the finance very close to yourself because we hadn't hired anyone in finance, but we had hired people in sales. And it actually just took a conversation to identify there were people there who were really interested to learn about other areas of the business and wanted to get involved and had the types of skills that we needed to do that. Numerous examples, but don't hold back. Have a conversation with the people below you. They're often keen to take on new responsibilities and identify it. And the tasks which you are identifying, you're doing so often that it's easy to delegate. The second one is, don't hold back from handing over the tasks that you think are boring or repetitive. Just because you think they're boring and repetitive, firstly, the people you're delegating to, they probably haven't done it before, and therefore to them it's a chance to learn and grow, and it gives them experiences in the business that they won't have had before, and looks great on their CV, is useful for their career, is useful for them as they want to progress in the company. They will often take those with open arms. Even if they don't, they will look at you stupidly as being stupid if they see that you are spending all your time doing tasks which they could do themselves. If they're not getting your time to do the high impact reviews or support or mentoring or coaching that they need, and you are spending all your time sending invoices or doing some other repetitive task, they will raise questions, and quite rightly.
Yeah, I love that. Completely agree. Fantastic. Well, that's all we've got time for. But if you want to, if people want to learn more about this kind of stuff, I highly recommend joining our weekly webinar. It's every Wednesday at 1 p.m. UK time, or at least normally on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. on UK time. And in it, we show you how to free up 15 hours per week and remove the constant stress of running a business without slowing down growth. To find out more and to register, just visit www.airmanual.co/webinar. Until next time, have fun.